Welcome to the BioTalk Unzipped podcast, where we unzip the stories behind medical progress by sharing the latest and greatest advances in biopharmaceuticals and medical technologies in a fun, entertaining, and enlightening format. And now your co-hosts, Gregory Austin and Dr. Chad Briscoe. And now join us for part 2 with Scott Schliebner.
Having conversations in the past, because almost everything I know about rare diseases I learned from you, is that team of physician, family, the disease organization, the related charity, the CROs, the patient advocates, the Scott Schliebners. Like it's this whole team thing. It's not just one person and their family signing up for a trial.
Right.
I'm not even sure what the question is, but maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, well, there is a little bit of an ecosystem there, I think, both in terms of managing a disease day to day. We used to, back in the day, we created we had to create some graphics for like a booth for like a rare disease conference. And we ended up creating this calendar that you would picture, like finding a calendar on like your family's refrigerator, right? That had like your weekly events, Johnny's got baseball practice, piano practice here. The rare disease family's calendar looks like, doctor's visits and lab tests all over, things crossed out and rescheduled. We got to fly over here to sort of have this done. Meanwhile, we're managing a complicated, complex disease. There's a lot of emotions involved. There's a lot of logistics. So you're really talking about that whole, it takes a village kind of thing, right? Whether it's family, and then I think the care teams are also extremely multifaceted. So, you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and a lot of cooks are needed in the kitchen to sort of make it happen. But it's, so I think if you're designing a clinical trial, you may have a PI at a site, but you may need to lean on other institutions or physicians. You may need to be communicating not just with the patient, but it may be parent, caregiver, relative as well, right? It just sort of creates a little bit of a bigger picture there.
Yeah, what I always saw also at PRA is you guys, the rare disease team was so much closer to the patients, because there might only be 6 of them out of 50 in the world,
right?
With these ultra rare diseases, and I always thought, wow, that's a really special group, and I understand why it seems that your team always got so much more. I mean, it seemed, and I think it's good, emotionally attached. It could be bad, I guess, in some ways, or hard, but it seemed like your group was always so much more emotionally tied to the challenges that they're going through. That truly a next level of a mission, which is really amazing. Are there? So another thing that I thought was really interesting that we learned back then was, or I learned, was about some of the utilization of social media and social listening. And then there were big data. You talked about recruitment with big data, and then that made me curious. Again, we talked about AI a little bit ago, but it made me curious, and I wanted to save it for this segment actually to talk about AI and how AI might be applied specifically in rare disease recruitment or treatment or clinical trials.
I think there's a huge role for it. I think there's a huge role. I think so. Earlier we were talking that more and more data keeps getting generated. So this episode airs on April 1st, 2024. So in 2024, we will have significantly more clinical trials than in 2023, and we will have to recruit more patients than in 2023, right? And those studies in general are increasingly complex in terms of the data we're collecting. So as you move forward each year, we have more trials, more patients, more data. And more data usually means, well, great, we have more to analyze, but that also means you're collecting more from patients. You're asking patients to go through additional assessments, right? It's more data is almost synonymous with increased burden on patients, right? So, and you overlay that the fact that we have something like 80% of clinical trials are behind schedule due to enrollment. So we're putting out a product there that doesn't really connect with our audience, or doesn't find the right patients, or is too burdensome for patients, right? So I think we do need better tools like AI to help us connect and maybe match patients to trials better. Maybe
Right.
the ability to sort through, there's a lot of firms doing like AI to sort through structured and unstructured data in an EMR to be able to identify a large, through a large data set, where are the handful of patients that might be eligible. I think to be able to maybe sort through social media, chat pages, other things like that, to be able to find people using language that might indicate that they're either a patient or taking care of a patient, and try to bring something to their attention, like from an awareness perspective. So I think that's really, really needed. Maybe the ability to look through large registries and other databases as well to sort of figure out where these sort of needles in a haystack really are.
Yeah, one of the other things we do in this, Scott, is I ask a question where I really ask you to unzip it. So a lot of times, BioTalk Unzipped, we want to unzip this, and one of the a lot of times I try to ask controversial questions, but I want to unzip this one in a different way. I want to ask you if you would tell us from your vast experience a success story, because when I've heard some of these success stories, it's brought me to tears. And I don't mind I don't know if you have something that comes to mind that you could just share, with your experience with rare diseases where there was some really exciting development or something in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of great. I mean, I think to your point earlier that the team that I had with me really closer to the patients, you said, and a little more emotionally connected. I think people in rare, I think you do find that people care about it a little more. They're kind of driven and passionate and really committed to it. Not to make fun of the topical acne study I mentioned earlier. We need that too. But when you're talking about like life-changing treatments that people are desperate for, and they're waiting for a trial, and they're hoping this trial opens next year because that's all we have, right? I mean, there's some of the like half of the rare diseases are like pediatric genetic, right? So there's a there's a genetic marker, or there's a genetic mutation, or something that is really the druggable target. And fortunately, we have more and more therapies being pursued. Not nearly enough, not still nearly enough like incentives, I think, and commercial sort of encouragement. But I've been part of a few different studies where you've had, families literally like in touch with a biotech company or in touch with us at a CRO, when is that Duchenne muscular dystrophy study opening, the targets XYZ? Because, my son's, there's an expiration point for this little boy. His ability to be ambulatory is going downhill on a week by week basis. At some point, he probably won't be able to breathe on his own. And you're like, there's nothing available. The only hope is to get him into that gene therapy study that's getting ready to open. And so, as a clinical trialist in this space, you want to do everything you can do to like cut through that freaking red tape, right? Like get that thing IRB approved, get a contract signed. Let's not take 12 weeks to build a database. We have real people that are waiting for this. People's future, hope, life literally depends on open that clinical trial. This is not a scientific experiment at this point. This is let's get that care in the hands of the people who need it. And so that kind of thing can really drive. And I used to say this too to our teams at PRA, whether you are a attorney working on contracts, or you're in finance processing patients, or you're processing documents, like everybody plays a key part. And if everybody really shows up with their A game, I don't know, do you know that marginal theory of aggregation? Do you know that sort of concept?
No.
It's like if you this is like, not to get off topic too much, but like if you take a big process and you break it down into all its little pieces, and you improve each little piece by 1%, When you put it back together, you've improved the whole thing
Mm-hmm.
much more than 1%, right? So if you take that clinical trial, and if everybody who's part of that team does a little bit more or a little better or a little more efficient, and you pull that back together, you could really move the needle quite a bit, and you could really get that therapy in the hands of somebody. You could save their life by just moving it along a little further. So, you know, there's been a couple in that space that I've been part of that I've been really happy to be part of. And, again, going back to the beginning, like I always knew I wanted to do something that was applied and made a difference to people.
Yeah.
When you start getting into those settings, you're like, okay, this is why I get up in the morning. This is my mission. And, like not out there selling cars. We're actually trying to like really make a difference for a family. So
Change
that's
a
been
life.
really amazing. Yeah. Yeah. So really feel very fortunate to be able to touch some of that occasionally.
Yeah. And I think you really hit on it too, where it can be that attorney reviewing an MSA or a site, a treatment site contract, and they're really busy, and meanwhile this kid might lose the ability to walk if you
Yep.
don't start this trial 1 week or 1 month or whatever sooner, and that's heavy. I mean, you kind of diverted from the path, but you almost had me. You were close. You were close, but that's amazing. So you touched on the one other space I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on. I'm not sure how much you've gotten into this side of the science, but you talked a little bit about the gene therapies and the easy, right? And I'm putting up air quotes here for those who aren't watching on YouTube, but the easy targets have been the single gene mutations, and now we're trying to look at these, targeting multiple genes, and CRISPR can do it, but it's not easy whatsoever.
Yeah.
So what do you see for the hope in that space and where that's going to really expand gene therapy to be so much more than the again, easy targets that aren't really easy?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Easy in quotes for sure. Because they're not super easy.
No.
I'd love to get a little more exposed to some of that. I've touched a bit of it, but not enough. And it also feels like that's an area that is, we're beginning to move pretty quickly, right? We're starting to see, a handful of gene therapies approved. The number of gene and cell therapy studies is really kind of ramping up quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think we're doing the right things around making sure we follow patients for long term to make sure there's no untoward effects that we can't see today. Like with our inflatable triangle in the stomach, you wonder where that's going to go a couple years down the road.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think it's amazing. I haven't touched enough of it, around some of the new, really cutting edge stuff. But I think that's the next frontier. And like, as you said, amazing potential to really get after some harder targets, less easy stuff that like requires a little bit more complicated approach. So I'm super encouraged because, back on the rare disease train for a second, you've got something like more than 10,000 individual rare diseases. You've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 400,000 people worldwide with a rare. So like together, rare is not rare. So more than the population of the US have a rare disease, and less than 5% of those have a treatment. So I love the fact we can start to go after some of the tough ones that have been sitting on a sideline because it either doesn't make commercial sense or we haven't figured out the science. So I'm really excited, ton of potential there.
I mean, getting real, it rarely makes commercial sense for,
Right.
I'll go right to the bioanalytical CRO, right? We're going to get one sample every couple of months, maybe. It might show up and it might not. That's not a business model that's real, real successful, as opposed to getting 3,000 samples all at once, So it's just endless challenges. So, yeah.
Yeah, there really are. It's a great question, though. I don't know, Chad, do you, from your perspective on the more of the analytical side, do you start to see a little more of those more advanced next generation things?
It's completely transformed the bioanalytical space in ways that I never imagined. But just bringing back old tools that have been out there in research that are now brought into the bioanalytical space. When I started, mass spec was it was brand new to in the 90s, right? It was brand new in bioanalytical, that is, right? It was an old technology, brand new to bioanalytical, and then it was all the biologics techniques with immunoassays and biomarkers entering bioanalytical labs. And now with gene and cell therapies, we very commonly in bioanalytical labs see flow cytometry to measure cell proliferation and target engagement for cell therapies and other therapies in the gene therapy space. Then we also want to measure the genes, right? Also in cell therapy. So qPCR now is a somewhat common tool in bioanalytical laboratories, and if you want to see, what's happening with your cytokines, running the cytokine panels to look at cell stimulation, using ELISpot is another real common tool that, related to gene therapy. So there's all sorts of tools that have been research tools or used in other spaces that now are just amongst the arsenal of technologies and techniques in bioanalytical. It from a purely science nerd standpoint, it's made it a lot more fun, right? And I do think that's important also in what we do, is that even though we're doing something very serious with a very serious outcome, it needs to be a little bit fun to just get in there and do what you do. So you need to enjoy that challenge, or after a while the grind will break you down. So
yeah, that's great. So you got a bigger toolbox these days.
Yeah, we got a bigger toolbox, and yeah.
We want our scientists engaged and excited. You want to attract more people into the field and more cool.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah,
absolutely. All right. So, do we want to tackle our second installment of new news?
Let's
Chad?
do it. Yeah.
All right. So, new news.
And I think this new news I'm taking, aren't I? So
yes, I would love for you to take that.
All right. So the FDA recently approved Iovance's Amtagvi as the first T-cell therapy for a solid tumor. I love to see this, and it was really exciting because one of the stories that I've been telling the people in my life who aren't in drug development is there's all these new gene and cell therapies, but especially the cell therapies are really challenging to target anything outside of the blood. How do you get these cells just to proliferate into solid tumors? And it seems that Iovance has figured this out, right? This is just straight from an article in Fierce Pharma, which again we'll link in the show notes. But yeah, the FDA approved the first of its kind immunotherapy from Iovance Biotherapeutics. It's essentially it's a next line treatment when following treatment with a PD-1 inhibitor. If it's unsuccessful, then they'll try this treatment. It's actually for melanoma. So very exciting treatment. Some of the typical challenges with cell therapy, not the least of which is cost. It's costing $500,000 per patient. But what's really fascinating about these is it's a cure, right? That's generally when I think of cell and gene therapies, they're cures. Yeah. So they have these huge one-time price tags, but they also cure the patient. They keep them off of off of some other medications. They keep them out of or minimize their time in the hospital. We had a guest on from Takeda, Russ Weiner, was a VP in Takeda, and he talked about, in his experience, he had a patient that was actually in hospice that went on, I think in that case, I believe it was a gene therapy, not a cell therapy, but they went on a gene therapy, and actually the treatment was so successul they came out of hospice. So these treatments are absolutely fantastic. So what do you think? We have talked quite a bit about some of the gene and cell therapies, Scott, but a cell therapy in a solid tumor, what do you think?
Well, I mean, there's the scientific part of it that I think is interesting. I think that, to your point, we've been going after blood cancers, really, right? Leukemias and lymphomas via that. And I don't know enough about that mechanism, but being able to, I guess, target something on the surface of a melanoma tumor, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
and then this cell therapy, I'm not sure if I guess it's brought in intracellularly and released or
It's a
something.
tumor infiltration
Tumor infiltration,
lymphocyte.
lymphocyte. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
So,
is
Yeah.
the technology,
yeah.
right?
So,
So,
I
so
mean,
it
well, my
brings the
first
T
thought
cell
is,
to the tumor.
yeah. And I mean, my first thought is, I don't know exactly how that works. However, like,
Me either.
Yeah.
if you could open up
Sounds
that
great,
whole
though.
world of solid tumors with
Yeah.
potentially curative cell therapies, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
colorectal, pancreatic, please, we need a new
Yeah.
treatment for
Yeah.
pancreatic cancer,
Mhm.
right? Lung and breast, prostate, you
Yep.
name it, right? If there's a way to leverage the technology or the approach or that kind of delivery aspect that they've sort of figured a way to kind of crack that nut, at least in melanoma. I don't know if it's applicable to other tumor types, but
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what a great avenue of potential, right? To be able to open up not just, you know, monoclonal antibodies or chemotherapeutic agents, but potentially curative cell therapy, right? It's amazing. I
Exactly.
think that's really,
Exactly.
really great. There's that whole host of other questions too around like ROI and pricing and some of the gene and cell therapy stuff gets really, really expensive, right? And we have some ethical questions to ask about that. We have
Mm-hmm.
payers wondering about this. We have people wondering if our
Mhm.
industry is overcharging for something.
Yeah.
Are we just recouping the cost of R&D, or are we making ridiculous profits? There's a lot of questions. I think we're going to be, there's going to be more prevalent, right, as we have more of these agents coming along with these really high price tags. But, there are a couple recent, hemophilia approvals as well, right?
Yes.
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
you talk about the impact on not just quality of life. Like, let's say you're supposed to get a weekly, transfusion every week for the rest of your life. The time, the impact on people, and just the sheer
Mhm.
costs from the healthcare perspective. You take all that off the table potentially with a one-time curative therapy. There's some
Yeah.
risks and benefits to weigh there.
Yeah, back in the day with Gilead, it was Gilead with Sovaldi and Harvoni. I think Sovaldi and Harvoni, right? That was a cure for Hep C,
Yep.
and
Mhm.
now
Yep.
the predominant of Hep C genotypes are cured, right? I think there's some some rare
Yep.
genotypes, but those are essentially gone. And back then I think it was $85,000 or something for an 8-week course of treatment. This treatment at a $500,000 actually seems like a bargain compared to some of the cell therapies that I've seen that are $2-3 million. So
Yeah.
I don't know that any patient's going to find that a bargain, but maybe the costs are coming down. I
Yeah.
think they will, right?
Yeah.
I think just like any new technology.
Yeah. Well, there's that challenge. We know that clinical development, we're especially in the U.S. The three of us are all in the U.S. here, and we have a fairly high bar, right, in terms of like regulatory standards and what needs to meet certain efficacy and safety thresholds, right? And
Right.
we're very thorough. We're very safe. You could say we're kind of leaders in the world that way. There is a price tag associated with that, right? There's some
Mhm.
cheaper cutting corners you could take, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but we've decided as a society to really keep that bar pretty high, and I'm glad we have. It makes the cost of drug development pretty significant, right? And when you're talking about, so when you look at like melanoma, for example, I don't know exactly who would be eligible for that therapy, but melanoma is a fairly prevalent cancer type, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so if it costs
Pernicious too.
X dollars for Iovance to develop this thing, but you have potentially hundreds of thousands of patients out there, you
Yeah.
know, you could price it in a way that you can recoup your costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you go to I don't know, I used the Duchenne muscular dystrophy example earlier. There's some of those real, small subtypes of that or small fractions of cystic fibrosis. If you're going to spend 500 million developing a new therapy, but there's only 300 patients in the world that can take it, you do the math and you're like, wow, that's really expensive. So, the hope is that this new technology, if they can take that to other, let's say, solid tumor types that are more prevalent, you could really, I don't like to use the cure word too much, right? But like, you could potentially be talking about curing a lot of cancer types, and it could be cost effective actually for some of those more prevalent diseases.
That's the dream.
Right.
So on
cool.
this one, just to clarify, and maybe Chad, you can help with the scientific side of this. It's approved for patients with advanced melanoma following prior treatment with a PD-1 inhibitor and a BRAF inhibitor if the tumor carries a BRAF V600 mutation.
Right.
That's totally Greek to me. Can you break that down? And does that limit the population?
Yeah, that's the short story, right? It limits the population. Yeah. It's not responded to other therapies, right, or not responded to the extent they want, and then this will target it if it has this specific genetic marker. So the BRAF is referring to a specific gene marker, and so if it has that specific marker, it sounds it nothing to do with BRCA, but when we think about breast cancer and how you can target breast cancer, the famous BRCA gene, right? So BRAF is a BRAF gene. I hadn't actually heard of the BRAF gene. I don't study melanoma, but that's what they're referring to. So it'd be a similar sort of thought process. If you fail the PD-L1, the checkpoint inhibitors, then if it has this specific genetic marker, then you can take this. So if there's, if there's 10 million people in the US that have melanomas each year, and then, the ones that go metastatic and you narrow it down. So, maybe you get down to 10,000 people a year that need to be treated. But even that, is certainly an important population.
So patients have the tumor tested. They see if they're BRAF V600 positive. This is right now second line therapy because it's following. But if you're Iovance, you probably are already planning your first line therapy study right now, right? So they want to move this further if they can.
But still, even though it's limited, it's a breakthrough. It's the first solid tumor, and that's that's the dam that's going to break, hoping for hopefully a lot more great therapies like that.
Yeah, right? That's how it goes. That's how it goes for sure.
Excellent. Well, we're getting long on time. There's a couple more questions I did want to kind of squeeze in, if you don't mind, Scott. One is a two-parter, and then those will be final questions. So the two-parter question is, what advice would you give to young professionals who are interested in a career in clinical drug development and on the clinical side? And what advice do you have for some of those established clinical professionals who maybe hit some kind of roadblock or barrier to advancing their career?
Interesting. Yeah. Well, for those of us on the clinical side of clinical research, there is not really a straightforward pathway or educational track to get here, right? So that's always been the irony is, you've got to have experience to start, but where do I get that experience, right? That sort of chicken and egg. So I think, if you want to move into this space, like I originally did 30 years ago, I had a research background. I had a little bit of a biostatistical analytical background, and I took a job as a clinical research coordinator in a neonatology setting at Children's Hospital, Salt Lake City. I'd finished my graduate program and kind of got involved. So my recommendation would be get into some role somehow, some way, whatever that is. Even if it's not your dream role, or maybe it's just something you'll do for a year or two, find a way to get into some kind of space, to break in some way. You may need to think about, volunteering a day a week, doing something for a little while to get some exposure or experience. Or in my case, kind of, I was like working on some research labs unpaid just to get exposed to some things. And it kind of naturally led to getting over the hump of like somebody giving me a shot. So for those of you that are already in the space and you have the ability to like hire or bring in people, always think about paying it forward, right? See if there's a way to help out younger people trying to break in, whether that's a internship or a shadowing experience or something like that to help people get over that hump. So I think that's key because, again, there's not a real clear educational pathway or a real clear experience pathway. So
Yeah.
get something.
Do a lot of people come in through like the CRA route, which probably wouldn't be the dream job, just getting in to help further along a clinical study? Yeah.
That's what I did. I mean,
you
need a little bit of experience with like patient charts and data, but I think that's an amazing way to learn about our industry. You get exposed to data management, clinical trial protocols, clinical sites. You dig into these patient charts. You get to see how it all kind of fits together. I think being a CRA for a while should be like mandatory experience. I was like the worst CRA ever. You need to be really detail oriented. You need to be very like decision. And I'd be like, oh, that's fine. Isn't that good enough? So I was not tailor made for that role, but I think I think that's a great exposure. So, finding something. And then again, if you're in a position to make a difference for somebody else, think about how you can give somebody a chance and help them kind of get over that hump initially. So I really try to do that. For part two, for those who've been in the space for a little while and have hit a roadblock or some kind of, I don't know, dead end, or they at least they feel like they're not growing. Yeah, I think it's really important to, we've touched on so many interesting topics today. There's so much new, exciting stuff, whether it's AI or patient-focused approaches or cell therapies now for solid tumors. There's a lot out there. And I think sometimes you can get a little sort of pigeonholed yourself by like the roles and the things I can do and what I could do next. And I would encourage people to think a little more broadly, that script is not fully written for yourself, right? You have some choices if you want to go somewhere. But I'm kind of one of these chronic get out of your comfort zone kind of people, right? Who really strangely just likes to like do new things, or if I'm doing something that I don't know how to do, or it's stressful or anxiety provoking, I'm like, okay, that's where growth is occurring. So if I'm ever feeling like stuck, I think you should try to dip your toe into a pond you've never been in before. Some kind of low risk, somewhat safe, yet put yourself out there in a way. Maybe it's an initiative at work. Maybe it's building out something and you don't know how to do it. Maybe you need to partner with someone. But there's a lot that can be done, and I think a little broadly. Try to like remove the artificial constraints you put in there and try something different, and see maybe the first thing you try you don't love, but I think once you kind of go down that pathway, you'll realize that you can tackle other new things and be successful with that. So, and then you kind of try to stumble on what you really love, maybe.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. And then finally, when you're not out there making the clinical world a better place, what are you doing for hobbies or for fun?
Yeah, well, I'm looking above my head right here at this double black diamond ski trail.
There you go.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, this time of year, I am on a mountain skiing, 100%.
Nice.
Anywhere, anytime, as much as possible. Unfortunately, that ski season ends sometime in the near future, but I try to capitalize on that. And then, so I live in Seattle, of course, so we have mountains nearby, and then we have a lot of water. So I either want to be in the mountains skiing, or when we're at a different time of the year, I just try to get out on the water as much as I can. So those are fun, like to be outside.
Do you have a favorite resort that you like to ski at?
I've been really fortunate. I went to college in Colorado, partly for school, partly for skiing. I went to grad school in Utah for school, partly for skiing.
That's great.
Great spots there. I can drive up to Whistler in BC from where I am here. That's an amazing big place. But For the purposes of today, I will go with Taos, New Mexico, as my favorite little off the radar, funky but really cool place.
All right.
Very good.
I
Would
gotta
not have
put that
guessed
on my
that.
list.
Excellent.
Yeah.
No kidding, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, great. Well, where can people best find you, Scott?
Aside from in my backyard office here in Seattle or on a mountain skiing, probably, I mean, I have a personal email and things like that. I think probably LinkedIn's probably a great place to
LinkedIn?
locate me. So,
All right.
Perfect.
my last name's tricky to spell and pronounce, but track me down there. I love connecting with people. I love learning what people are doing. I do want to try to support people in furthering their research, careers, interests, whatever it is. So, yeah, please reach out if you want to track me down that way. I'd love it.
Awesome.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, just as a reminder to our audience, BioTalk Unzipped will be making a donation to Scott's favorites charity called Rare Givers. There'll be a link in the show notes if you want to know more about that. So please check that out. You can also find Chad and myself, the links to our LinkedIn profiles and some more information in the show notes as well. Scott, it was an absolute delight having you on the show.
Yes.
Thank you so much for spending some time today. We'll get this out in April, and we look forward to getting some great feedback from our audience.
This was great. Thank you, guys. This has been
thank
really
you,
fun.
Scott.
You bet.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. Thank you for the new news and for the great conversation. Great to chat with you both.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us with this episode with Scott Schliebner. Please do like and subscribe the episode and our podcast. It'll help us to get the word out to more listeners. And check in soon for upcoming episodes with Jason Burke and Andy Vick. Thanks and take care.